Okay, hello everybody. Hello, hello. Bonjour, bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Hope that everything is going well for everybody, and I hope that everybody is having a good time in school. Welcome back. Oh, excuse me. This week's lesson is lesson 3, and we're going to be talking about French folk and fairy tales. So, real quick before we get into the lesson, just want to give a little overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to be learning about two of the most prominent French writers, in my opinion. That might not be as universal as I'm making it out to be, but in my opinion, two of the most influential French writers of folk tales and fairy tales. We'll learn some basic vocabulary from them and just gain a general idea of the tales. We'll look over some of the different works, talk about their writing influences, and we'll talk about how the tales have changed over time and how we know them today. Okay, so the folk tale. The general structure of a folk tale includes a plot or a story that's driven over a structure that is driven throughout the whole narrative. Then we have the setting where the story takes place, where we're watching the plot unfold, and then we have the characters within them. The most important thing about a folk tale is that their characters have some sort of struggle, and there's a moral throughout the story. You know, you hear the saying, the moral of the story. Well, that's very important in these types of folk tales, and it's very traditional. The origins of the French folk tale and the fairy tale. I just included this because I thought it would be helpful. There's Occitan literature, um, which comes from the south of France, and it's from the 11th and 12th centuries. Excuse me, and it mainly came from the Middle Ages, the knights and all that. And there were songs, ballads, poems. They were often written in Occitan French, which derives from Latin. And Occitan French was one of the first branches of Romance languages that derived from Latin and weren't Latin specifically itself. In fairy tales, they're a little bit known for their literary rather than oral aspects. Folk tales were told from person to person. Fairy tales were more of they were more written. People would write them and document them instead of talk about them, whether they were in some type of social setting. Many writers like Perrault or Charles Perrault, who we're going to talk about, wrote stories from other sources. Perrault wrote renditions of Aesop's fables, which I'm sure you have probably heard of once or twice, at least. And the other writer we're going to talk about wrote his own stories and wrote renditions of other writers' stories. Let's get into it. So just some general questions before we actually get into the nuts and bolts of everything that has to do with French folk tales. I just have some general questions. With a partner, you can talk about your favorite fairy tale. You know, what was one that you've always liked the most? What was one that maybe when you were little, if your parents might have told you one? I think my own wasn't a fairy tale. It was just this little book about a clownfish. Wasn't really, it is the same idea of a folk tale where it had some type of struggle and there was a narrative, but it wasn't exactly a fairy tale or a folk tale that you would know today. But if you don't have a favorite, what tale have you learned about the most? Have you had teachers use tales as examples? Did you learn about a tale in school for any specific reason? And lastly, where do you think that tale came from? Do you think they were written in America by an American writer? Do you think they were written in Europe, Asia, Africa, Canada, other countries from North America, maybe South America? Yeah, think about it. Think, we may not know firsthand, but these tales come from all over the globe, and it's not just American writers or North American writers, to be even a little bit more broad. You know, they come from all the different regions that I mentioned. So yeah, just think about those questions, talk it out a little bit for maybe 2 or 3 minutes tops, just to get your brains moving. Let's see here. There we go. So the first writer we're going to talk about is Jean de La Fontaine. Jean de La Fontaine. Fontaine? Jean de La Fontaine. Sorry. He was a major folklorist who wrote many fables. He was born in 1621 and died in 1695. As I have written there, he is one of the most famous French poets of his time. We're going to talk about, well, first, here's a wonderful resource for the fables of Fontaine, which I will show you later, but I just wanted to put it in the presentation so you could see the link in case you couldn't access it a different way. Excuse me. Some of Fontaine's pieces. He wrote many originals, but he also translated a lot of Aesop's fables from into French from English. But he also did his own renditions. Excuse me. Most of his well-known collection was published in Les Fables de La Fontaine. Les Fables de La Fontaine. So that's just to help you pronounce it if you want to try and say it in French. They include many stories such as The Crow and the Fox, Le Corbeau et le Renard, Le Corbeau et le Renard, The Fox Who Wished to Be as Big as an Ox, Le Grenouille qui veut se faire aussi grosse que le bœuf. Le Grenouille, it's a hard word to pronounce. It was like brouillard from last week. But le grenouille qui veut se faire aussi grosse que le bœuf. The wolf and the dog, le loup et le chien. Le loup et le chien. The oak and the reed, le chêne et le roseau. Le chêne et le roseau. And then the lion grown old. Le lion devenu vieux. Le lion devenu vieux. So I just included these 5 as examples from Fontaine because some of these I've learned myself, and some of the others I just think have good morals. And throughout this lesson, I don't have the actual fables themselves because they're often long, and sometimes even the English versions are just long to get through and they're hard to analyze. But I do have sources for you, so you all can have access to a wide variety of fairy tales and folk tales from different authors or writers, so you can examine them yourself and maybe try to find the moral in them. But in this lecture, I talk about, or not lecture, but this lesson, I talk about the morals because they're the most important parts of the story. So yeah, let me go to the next one. So yeah, right, that's the next. Yeah. So next, we're going to talk about the morals of each story. In Le Corbeau et le Renard, the moral Fontaine intended to have was never fall for flattering words. We should always be wary of flatterers and never trust anyone blindly. So I also have a video of Le Corbeau et le Renard and Le Loup et le Chien. Those 2, I could find short videos on YouTube, but the other ones are a bit longer, so it was harder to find something that could encompass the whole story. But anyway, in Le Grenouille qui veut se faire aussi gros que le bœuf, the moral was not all creatures can become as great as they think, or some people beg to be better than they are and hope for the downfall of others. Be wary of these type of people. Le loup et le chien, the moral of the story is that it's better to starve free than to be overfed as a slave or a servant, which we'll see in the video that I have. But for the other stories, for Le Chêne et le Roseau, or the oak and the reed, you can see that being the sturdiest doesn't always mean that you're the strongest. The reed can bend and withstand the wind while the oak falls because it can't bend. And Le Lion devenu vieux, or the lion grown old, one of the most well-known morals of the story is that only the cowardly abuse the age or death of the majesty or the royals, which and when I say one of the most well-known morals, I mean these stories were told in several different manners. Again, Fontaine um, Aesop, uh, many other medieval writers and older writers told these stories, and they were different. I wouldn't say totally different morals, but morals that were just a tad bit different and not exactly the same. Okay, so here we have the video. This is in French. I have subtitles for it auto translates. It's a little hard to follow, but at least you'll be able to hear it and see it. And I can talk about it a little bit afterwards.
Le corbeau et le renard. Maître corbeau, sur un arbre, perché, tenait dans son bec un fromage. Maître renard, par l'odeur alléchée, lui tint à peu près ce langage. Bonjour, monsieur du corbeau. Que vous êtes joli, que vous me semblez beau. Sans mentir, si votre ramage se rapporte à votre plumage, vous êtes le phénix des hôtes de ces bois. À ces mots, le corbeau ne se sent pas de joie. Et pour montrer sa belle voix, il ouvre un large bec, laisse tomber sa proie. Le renard s'en saisit et dit: Mon bon monsieur, apprenez que tout flatteur vit aux dépens de celui qui l'écoute. Cette leçon vaut bien un fromage, sans doute. Le corbeau, honteux et confus, jura, mais un peu tard, qu'on ne l'y prendrait plus.
Okay, so hopefully you could read the subtitles. I know they probably were a little small. Maybe you could pause my video and read them aloud. Some of the words were a little jumbled, but the idea is that the the raven or the crow was sitting in the tree with the cheese in his mouth, and the fox, who was hungry, came and was flattering him with all these different compliments. So the raven or crow wanted to prove himself or talk about it. So he opened his beak and dropped the cheese, and the fox took it and had a meal and he ate. So the whole idea of it is, again, don't be don't be so don't be so willing to listen to flatterers. Excuse me. I was trying to find the right word. Don't be um, so open, again, to listen to flatterers, and don't be gullible. That's the word I was looking for. Don't be gullible and be mindful of flatterers. But yeah. So the next video is Le Loup et le Chien. This one's a little quicker, a little shorter, and again should have subtitles that auto translate. So let me, oh, hold on, excuse me, try and figure this out real quick. Translate English. Hopefully this works well.
Il ne tient qu'à vous, beau sire, d'être aussi gras que moi. Quittez les bois, vos pareils y sont misérables. Suivez-moi, vous aurez un bien meilleur destin. Il suffira de presque rien, donner la chasse au mendiant, flatter son maître. Dès lors, vous recevrez salaire à votre mesure. Oh, ça, oh, ce n'est rien, vraiment, peu de choses. Juste le... euh,
Okay. So in that video, you could see some of the words were a little jumbled up again. YouTube's auto translate doesn't work the best, but it's all that I have. And at least you all could have heard some of the story in French. But again, the moral of this story is the wolf finds it better to be starving but free instead of being um, fat, as he put it, or overfed as a servant to a human master. But yeah, these are just two examples of Fontaine's stories. Excuse me. And we'll move on to Charles Perrault, or Charles Perrault. One of the most, he's, again, I said this for both of them, which is kind of ironic, but I do believe this man actually to be one of the most influential writers of fairy tales in history. Again, that is my opinion, but as you'll see the different stories that we're going to talk about, maybe you might agree with me a little bit. Born in 1628, died in 1703. He was part of l'Académie Française. This academy was a well-known academy in France, and it was prestigious to go to this academy for a lot of people of all different parts of the world, not just Western Europe itself. He published a lot of his tales in different groupings or different sets, different collections. One that we might know the most is the Tales of Mother Goose, often have his stories all together, or as I have here a picture, les contes, or stories, et les fables, or fables, de Perrault. So les contes et les fables de Perrault. So learn about, and here's another great source for Perrault's work, which I'll show you later. But again, just wanted you all to see the link in case you can't access it a different way. And there it is. So some of Perrault's works, he told many renditions of stories that were originally written by the Brothers Grimm, which maybe you don't know the Brothers Grimm, but you'll know some of their stories. These stories and their messages have changed over time, thanks to many influences, as we'll see, and as you can see in this list, a lot of these have been changed thanks to Disney. Some of his works are Sleeping Beauty, La Belle au Bois Dormant, La Belle au Bois Dormant, Cinderella ou Cendrillon, Little Red Riding Hood, Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, Le Petit Chaperon Rouge. It's a little hard doing the R's right next to each other, but hopefully you'll get the hang of it. So Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, Puss in Boots, Le Chat Beauté, Le Chat Beauté, Le Chat Beauté. Saying it's just a weird pronunciation that even I'm having a little fun remembering how to say these things. And then Bluebeard, which may not be as well known as the other four, or La Barbe Bleue, La Barbe Bleue. The reason you might not know Bluebeard as much as the other four is because Bluebeard is a little bit more, for adults, I would say, a little bit more violent, a little bit more vulgar. So it might not be the most appropriate for students, which is also another reason why I didn't include the exact stories, because some of them, or most of them, and we'll talk about later, weren't the same as we might know them today. So the moral of the story for Cendrillon, or Cinderella, is graciousness is more important than physical beauty, and a godmother or godfather is important to success in life, which could be telling of the society back then. In France in the 17th and 18th century, status was very important, and you could see that through these different stories, especially with Cinderella. And yeah, I think that Perrault shows that in his stories. For Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, or Little Red Riding Hood, the moral of the story is that there was a warning for beautiful girls to watch out for men who could be dangerous, but not just men, but watch out for people who might want to do harm to them in general. This could be universally interpreted to watch out for somebody's malintent. Puss in Boots the moral of that story is to stress the stresses of owning industry or being industrious and having a certain level of savoir-faire, which is a French term that we literally translate to such as like general knowledge, or like you already know how to do this or how to do something. So that was also very important to people of certain status back in this time period. And again, you need to watch out for people's malintent, because a lot of people were trying to exploit other people's status. So it's very telling to the time. For Sleeping Beauty, or La Belle au Bois Dormant, don't rush to find love. It could take a long time to find the perfect match, which might be telling in the story itself. And then La Barre Bleue, or Bluebeard, curiosity can often lead to regret. It's a little more humorously, whatever the color of a husband's beard, the wife of today is always the one in charge. But anyway, the main idea of Bluebeard is curiosity can lead to regret. But again, there's other parts of status or other influences of status and society put into these stories from Perrault because of the time period and because of his own status. So I didn't have videos for those because they're really long. So it was hard for me to find videos for them. I couldn't find one that was short enough that just gave you, an idea of the French, an idea of the story itself. But right now we're going to go move on to vocabulary. So I just took words from the titles of the stories and other words that have to do, you'll see there's another slide after this that just have to do with general vocabulary around the essence of fairy tales. So the list real quick: le renard, the fox; le corbeau, the crow or raven; le lion, the lion; le loup, the wolf; le chien, the dog; le grenouille, the frog; le chêne, the oak; le roseau, the reed. And here's continuing the list: un chevalier, a knight; une baguette, not the bread; une baguette magique, magical wand; un conte, une histoire; un conte, une histoire, don't pronounce the H, a story; une fable, a fable; une épée, remember these aigus and the pronunciation of the E elongated a little bit; une épée, same thing here, or une épée is a sword, sorry. The next one as well: une fée, a fairy; un fantôme, a ghost; la morale, the lesson or moral; un monstre, it's pretty similar, a monster; and then un sorcier or une sorcière, un sorcier or une sorcière, a wizard or a witch. So here's a personal activity that I put together real quick. Hopefully you'll be able to do that in the time that you have, but try to come up with a fable for yourself. Create 2 characters in a specific setting and include a moral of the story. My example, which I came up with in a couple of minutes, was the dog and the cat, and they always fight because there's stereotypes about them that they give each other, till one they decide to stop fighting and try to make amends, and they eventually find out that they have a lot in common and like many things, like many similar things, sorry. And the moral of the story is don't judge someone over preconceived notions and get to know them. So if you can try and think of something like this, it doesn't have to be 2 animals. It can be, it could be a part of nature and an animal, or it could be two parts of nature, or it could be living things or inanimate objects. It could be anything, but try to come up with a struggle and come up with a lesson to the story. Fairy tales today, real quick. Prose fairy tales have been westernized or Disneyfied, meaning they've been softened. If you read the original Brothers Grimm, Little Red Riding Hood, and then Perrault's rendition or translation, you can see that they're very different. Again, I didn't include the story because it's a little more brutal. It's a little more inappropriate. Not completely inappropriate, but it might not have been best for the lesson. there isn't as much, and there also isn't as much focus on the moral anymore, or the moral has been changed. So, like back then, um, Perrault's Cinderella could be interpreted as there's a importance and status and an importance between women and men, but in today's Cinderella, we can look at it as, especially with the new rendition that Amazon Prime did, uh, with Camila Cabello, I think it was. Um, Women don't necessarily need men to be successful. So these things have changed over time, and I shouldn't say that they've specifically been softened or babied. In certain ways they have, but in certain ways they've changed for the better, as we can see. So it's good. The impact of fairy tales, kids all over the world know about or people all over the world know about them. Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood. Um, Many families, including my own, may own books of Aesop's fables or Mother Goose stories. So many families travel to Disneyland, and Disney has become this monopoly of a company in general. And even a little fact, the Disney castle is modeled after Mont Saint-Michel, which is a castle in France. So yeah, so that's it for this lesson. Let me see, I'll show you the activities I've put together. Here it is. Excuse me, my student portal. And let me show you. So I put together this little vocabulary matching sheet. We did this for lesson 1. I did it again because it's very simple, very easy. So again, this time, look at the French word and try to match it with the English words on the other side. So I'll help you with the first one yet again. Le grenouille. Le grenouille is, see if I can find it. It's in here somewhere. I. So one is I, and le grenouille is the frog. And you want to go through and do the rest of these. So there's 19 of them, which shouldn't be too bad. Yeah, so that's that. And I just wanted to show you the different sources and options that you have to look at these stories. Here's Aesop's Fables homepage. This is a whole website dedicated. You have a whole index of all the different stories. You can find the ones that we talked about. Same thing here. I found this on World of Tales, which is about Charles Perrault. Give you a little intro, and they have all the stories we talked about and some other ones too. And then lastly, I gave you, which we didn't talk about in here, but I gave you Grimm's Fairy Tales, which have, there's Little Red Cap, a Little Red Riding Hood, and you can find all the original stories. So yeah, go back to here. Oh, I also have a Quizlet set, which I didn't show you, but I'll have the link for it. It has a bunch of different stuff, and again, you can play all the games on Quizlet, so that should be fun. But yeah, that's lesson 3. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too fast, too short, boring or anything. I tried to do my best. It's hard. It was hard including stuff about the folk tales because I couldn't give you the whole tale. So yeah, hopefully it was fun, and I will see you all next week. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy your week, whichever day this is posted. I hope that you enjoy it. So yeah, bye-bye.